together. We had a 3,000 person rally on campus and then marched around a little bit part of the area around Sproul on the street in the city of Berkeley, came back and voted to set up an encampment, and then began to set up the tents. And right as soon as we started to do that, the police immediately moved in, grabbed the tents, and then also started to brutalize protesters. What was different about this and unique and important was the fact that the students and the protesters united together, and we stood our ground. And we made clear that we were committed to taking a stand and making this fight for our public university and for the demands that we had already gone into that day voting for and fighting to realize. The police, in the process of brutalizing protesters, attacked dozens of people, arrested a handful in the first round, but then 6 hours later came in even more brutally, arrested even more protesters, I think 40 in the second round, and also had even more backup and support than they did the first time. BAM filed this lawsuit very, very shortly after this, within a week, because we wanted to make sure that we defend our right to build this movement and stand up for public education, that we defend each other and have each other's back, in ensuring that these kinds of attacks could not continue by the police or by the university, and to also assert and make sure that we can strengthen this movement and use this case as a way to continue and build this movement that simply must continue as an independent, integrated movement, standing up for the right to public education, for equality and for integration. So I'd like everyone to welcome Shanta Driver, who'll say more about our case and present a lot of the material.
So there is going to be a stack of Xeroxes that are coming and should arrive in the next few minutes. And the danger of doing a presentation with in which you're trying to make your points through documentary evidence is that you can spend the large part of the presentation having people flip through stuff and trying to read stuff, and that can be in some ways distracting. But whatever we do or do not use today, I think the material that you will be provided will be helpful in substantiating the case that we intend to make. Certainly as a political case, and to the extent that we can integrate it into our legal case as part of our legal case. I assume that, I'm going to start by assuming that everybody here has seen the videos of what took place on November 9th. Is there anyone who has not seen them? Okay, good. So I want to begin by making a few general points and try to provide some type of an outline for what's going to be covered in this presentation so that it might be a little bit easier to follow. And to talk about the three lessons that I think are most important to keep in mind, especially with the advent of a new chancellor on the campus, who I think is likely to be Dean Edley, who is currently the dean of the law school and is responsible for promulgating this report with one other person, which is now, I understand, was just finalized, which is a handbook for administrations of how to suppress, repress, and otherwise render impotent student protest actions. And it's presented as a way to avoid what happened on November 9th in the future by taking a set of measures that include a whole number of things that we'll get into a little bit later, most of which were suggested to the administration after the 2009 events around Wheeler Hall, where the police were brought in large numbers and there was an occupation of Wheeler Hall. and most of which were rejected by the administration in their planning and what they did on November 9th. So I think given that we'll be faced with a new chancellor, and given that the response of the campus to a new chancellor is to want to give such a person a honeymoon period, to want to believe that what they're saying in words is true rather than untrue, I think it's worth looking at some of the recommendations from the report that Dean Edley published, but also from his actions around what took place on November 9th. The three rules that I'd say that are just extremely important for the movement to keep in mind in deciding how to proceed on the question of the defense of public education is, first and most importantly, that every single administrator in the UC system and virtually every single legislature will say that they are for the defense of public education, while they will be arguing for the necessity of having government, university, industrial relations and bringing in large amounts of private funding for the university. They'll be arguing that that partnership is the way to defend public education. And I think what will become clear from the presentation is that nobody who is for relying heavily for the funding of a university on things like the $500 million grant that this university got from BP, which I will be arguing was the main precipitator for what happened on November 9th. Nobody who is going to be taking that kind of money is going to be allowing BP to decide who gets the grant money, is going to hand over that level of academic freedom to a single industrial polluter, is going to really be for the defense of public education or for the defense of keeping the universities, in particular the public universities, as bastions of academic freedom. And so the first thing I just say is, whatever anybody says, if they support a public-private partnership, if they're arguing that we must rely more on alumni dollars and on industry and on government grants that combine the use of the university with private interests, then I think anyone who says that, rest assured, they are against the defense of public education. I think what you could say is that it's analogous to what's taking place in K through 12 education, in that every single person that supports the privatization of public education through the creation of charter schools and the experiment over the last 4 years of the Obama administration of trying to set up a parallel private educational system to the American public school system, everyone who supported that endeavor says they're doing it to defend public education. And every single one of those people is lying. There is no way to be for the construction of a separate private but publicly funded K through 12 educational system and claim to be a defender of public education. And that is true at the level of the university as well. The second thing that I would say that comes through loud and clear from what took place on November 9th and the recommendations coming out of it is the importance of having a student leadership that is independent and doesn't see as its primary objective pursuing a political mainstream career or getting a good paid job. Because in the end, I think it's fair to say that what happened to the Occupy movement was when that movement, and unfortunately too many of its leaders, were confronted with the choice of do they fight for the demands of the movement, or do they refuse to even talk about them in the meeting that they have with the administration because they're concerned about compromising their career options. If you have leaders like that, you're always going to lose. And the third and last thing that I'd say is that it's clear from what happened on November 9th, and that if there is a central lesson to be drawn, it's that the fight to defend public education, that while it is absolutely vital that it occur on campuses like this and have students to lead it, must incorporate the community, in particular the Latino and Black communities, which provide the social power to win the fight in order for it to be won. And there is a constant theme in all of the emails and all of the stuff that's written concerning why the police were brought in to the Berkeley campus that center on the question of how to deal with what the administrators euphemistically call non-affiliates, meaning people who don't go to the university, and how to square the fact that the university is a public university that advertises, in the case of Berkeley, that it is open to the public between 6 a.m. in the morning and 12 midnight, with the fact that the main impetus to shut down the putting up of the tents early was the fear that Occupy Oakland would invade Berkeley's campus and would be entrenched in Berkeley forever. And I think that wasn't really the fear. That's how it's expressed. But I think the fear, to the extent that there is truth to how that fear is expressed, both at what happened at UC Berkeley and at UC Davis, it's that there might be leaders who emerge from the struggle, including, I think, BAMN leaders who always have had the perspective of making the fight to link what we're doing on the campuses to Oakland's Black and Latino communities at the forefront of what we're doing, that those leaders might rise in importance, that their proposals might become proposals that are accepted by the movement, and that would mean the real inclusion of Oakland on this campus. And that, from the standpoint of the powers that be, is an extremely dangerous prospect, because it means that the main weapon that this administration has to defeat student protest, which is not the police, it isn't the batons, it isn't the hosing people down with tear gas, it isn't any of those obvious repressive mechanisms. The main weapon they have to defeat struggle is to convince a whole number of students, including Black and Latino students who come onto this campus, that if they want a career, they better be marching in lockstep with the administration. And that weapon is currently the most powerful weapon, that ideological weapon is the most powerful weapon that this administration has in defeating stuff. And it's just made clear through an exchange with Dean Edley and two Latina women students who get arrested early on the day, on November 9th, for carrying a sign and a bullhorn, respectively. And that arrest, I think you could say, was clearly an absolute breach of free speech rights. To be arrested on a college campus as a law student because you're walking through the campus with a sign, and the message of that sign is counter to the policies of this administration, because it is for the real defense of public education, to be arrested for walking through the campus with a bullhorn. I mean, those are obvious violations of free speech, and they really set the tone for the day, but they also provided an opportunity for the administration to make clear, in particular to Latino and Black students, that that if you object to that kind of treatment on this campus, you will be squashed down, you will be humiliated, you will be accused of being over the top and of exaggerating what happened, and that more than anything, you'll be accused of not being loyal to the law school and to the aims of this university, and so forced to retract any complaints you'd have about that gross violation of free speech rights, because if you don't, then ... you won't be here. So I think those are the main lessons. I want to start by saying what my view of November 9th is, and then try to provide some evidence to support that, and then talk about what transpired and kind of what is most noteworthy in what's been written about the events or coming out of the events, and then end with a set of proposals for where I think the movement needs to be going and what we need in order to rebuild the struggle on this campus and continue to move things forward. Okay, I want to begin by saying that to me, the question that was the most puzzling question when I started to think about what happened on November 9th was, why did Burgeneau do what he did? And there've been a lot of explanations for that haven't really made sense to me. There are people who have put forward the explanation that Burgeneau, decided to use that level of force, and the administration decided to use that level of force because they were caught off guard by what happened. And they were confused, and they were kind of desperate. And that's clearly not the case. They had been meeting for a couple of months, and they had gone through a dress rehearsal of what situations like this were in 2009 around the Wheeler occupation. And there's a report from that you have some parts of in what you have here, which is something that's called the Brazil report, and it's this document here that sums up. 20, 2009. Yeah, it sums up the findings of the review board, and one of the points that they make in that report is that it was possible to attribute what they call the dysfunctionality of the police and the administration in light of what happened in 2009 by saying that most of the administrators were brand new to the campus. And the one thing that is that comes out in the investigation that Burgeneau commissioned of what happened on November 9th is that body, which was appointed by Burgeneau, and so in no way, shape, or form was independent from the university, says, well, at least the one excuse that they could rely on in 2009, that they were all new, isn't true anymore, because it's the same people, and they were all around then, and they read our recommendations then, and so acting as they did can't be attributed to lack of experience or lack of knowledge. I think the second reason that you could give for Burgeneau acting as he did, and this is close to the truth, but I want to clarify the truth a little bit more, is his tremendous opposition and fear to a movement building at UC Berkeley that could spread certainly through California and nationwide, and could set a new era of student mass action forward throughout the nation. And okay, I would accept that, except for the following fact. And like I said, there's a lot of this that I accept, but I want to make it a little bit more clear. Every single chancellor, every single university president in the 1960s learned the lesson, and it's passed down from generation to generation, that if you attack a demonstration of students, even a small demonstration, that most of the students on the campus regard as the well-intentioned but kind of far out demonstrating of, you know, the radical fringe on the left radical fringe on the campus, that if you attack it, the one thing that you can be sure of is that that movement will explode in its growth. Not because the attack of those students convinces their fellow students that what they're fighting for is right, but because the attack on the students convinces their fellow students that they did not deserve to be beat down like dogs for fighting for what they were fighting for. And that accepting and allowing that on your campus means that there can be no real expression or exchange of ideas, and that there can be no real fight or opposition put up by students, and most importantly, that no student is safe on the campus that has an encounter with the police if the police are allowed to get away with what they did. Bourgeois had to know that. So when he makes the decision to continue using the same tactic at the 9:30 demonstration that he used at the 3:30 demonstration, he knew that there was going to be a greater explosion on the campus. He knew that there was going to be an expansion of the movement. He knew that he was going to get a lot of angry emails from a lot of alumni that had come to Berkeley and been around during the time when Berkeley was known as the place that you came if you wanted to be a radical, and that a lot of those alumni that had participated in those demonstrations had graduated to being CEOs of major companies. There's a very famous picture from the 1960s, not from this university, but from Cornell University, of a black student at the doorway of an administration building that's been occupied with a gun in his hand, with an automatic rifle. And the black student in that picture is currently the CEO of American Express. He came a long way from there. And that's got to be true for a lot of the Berkeley alumni, none of whom went that far, but many of whom climbed the ladder to get to those heights. And so if you're one of those people, you don't really think that it's right to repress student struggle, because first, you don't think it's that dangerous because you weren't that dangerous, and second, you think that it could be a way to enter into a career path. It certainly makes it possible, if you're a minority student, to be making clear to the administration that having more counselors, people who cool down struggles, more offices of this or that to regulate student struggles are an important thing to add on to your campus. So I wouldn't say that it was exactly that that he didn't know. I would agree with the fact that it was to suppress things, and I think it was for a very specific purpose. So I just want people to just open up to the last page of this UC Berkeley Day of Action planned for Wednesday. You know what, I don't have the big quote, the one I don't think, unless it's in here. Yeah, is it in here?
Oh, that was him with another professor.
Wednesday, the last page of it.
And so these are kind of, they're kind of, you know, they're anti-chronological in the way that they go. So the bottom one is not the last one, it's the first of this series. And I'll just read it out loud. It's from Breslar, who's one of the people, a professor of political science and a high-level administrator who still is on the campus. And it says, Bob, just back from Sproul Plaza, where about 300 to 400 people tried to set up an encampment on the lawn of the northwest side of Sproul Hall. After assessing the situation, the police moved in to remove the tents, enforcing campus policy of no encampments. Protesters locked arms to prevent police from getting to the tents. Police used batons to gain access to the tents. There are still 200 to 300 people gathered watching, and in some cases screaming at the police, who have established a perimeter. Harry and Gabor, perhaps also Linda, are speaking to the graduate assembly in Anthony Hall. Helicopters and reporters are around. This is likely to continue for days, I suspect. I don't yet know whether there have been any arrests. And the first response from Burgeneau is, this is really unfortunate. However, our policies are absolutely clear. Obviously, this group want exactly such a confrontation. And it is critical that we do not back down on our no encampment policy. Otherwise, we will end up in Kwan land. The Kwan refers to the mayor of Oakland, Jean Kwan, right, that's her name, who had already had attacked the Occupy Oakland encampment, and had that police action result in, again, an explosion of the movement and several mass actions that shut down Oakland in defense of Occupy Oakland to come out of stuff. So, in fact, what Burgeneau chooses to do ends him up exactly in his racist way of putting it, Kwan land, except that Jean Kwan was able to rehabilitate herself and Burgeneau wasn't. So he was less fortunate because he's on the way out and she's probably on the way to re-election. No. You're like, okay, good. I hope you're right. I really, really hope you're right. People should pay the price for what they did. I want to just say what I think is the kind of essence of Burgeneau's decision. And it's where he says, this is really unfortunate. However, our policies are absolutely clear. Obviously, this group want exactly such a confrontation. And I would say that I think the person that wanted such a confrontation was Burgeneau. And he was willing to take the risk of all the crap he was going to take from the alumni, of the bad publicity, of the temporary expansion of the movement, to make a point to BP and other private industrial giants that he had been courting, that Berkeley was going to be a place that was safe for them to function, and that the administration was prepared to go to great lengths, even to the length, in the case of Burgeneau, of jeopardizing their own job to assure those corporations that there would never be an occupation of the brand new BP research center by students that were already talking about occupying things and doing it, and that that in the event that such a thing was tried, that there would be a swift and definitive response on the part of the administration. And I think that for what I'm saying, for a couple of reasons. I think, first of all, the $500 million grant that the university got from BP doubled the amount of funding that the university had gotten from private industry. Winning that grant, which there were a lot of places that BP was courting to give that money to, achieving that victory was extremely important to Burgeonow. And when Burgeonow was hired here, he was hired with the full knowledge of the regents that hired him, that one of the things he was really expert at was making sure that private industries that wanted to donate to the campus that he was head of would be able to do that, and that he was prepared to take a scandal to accomplish that. At the University of Toronto in 2000, there was a brand new center that was created that was a mental health center, a center concerned with, it's called the Center on Addiction and Mental Health. And a large part of the funding for that was from the Lilly Corporation, Eli Lilly, which makes Prozac. And in the course of the coming up to the opening of that center, the University of Toronto hired a really noted psychiatrist who was actually from Scotland, a guy named David, I think Healy is the last name. And he published a paper after he was offered the job, or a paper was appeared in print after he offered the job, that was critical of Prozac and said that there had not been blind studies of the drug, and that in his opinion, taking Prozac was as likely to result in your killing yourself as it was to result in your not killing yourself. And his offer to be head of this thing was immediately withdrawn. There was a big scandal around it because it was clearly in response to the fact that this guy was taking independent positions from the drug companies, but that really didn't faze Burgeonow at all. And he didn't lose anything for it because he got a promotion when he got the job here. And he had the same interaction at the University of Toronto with another drug company that had, in the year prior to his coming, seen to the firing of a woman professor for being critical of their research standards and the conclusions that they came out with. And a year after Burgeonow was hired, he accepted a huge grant from that same drug company for the University of Toronto. This is something he's really, really good at, and it goes long and deep into his history, including courting IBM to be, a big sponsor of MIT's development of scientific programs when he was the dean of students there. And I think from his standpoint, what he had achieved with BP had to be protected. And the problem for somebody who's in the position of a Burgeonow, and even more, the problem for BP was that it's the reputation of the corporation as being absolutely scandalous around environmental issues goes far and wide. Obviously, what happened with the spill in the Gulf, and then the cleanup that followed that, and the fact that they knew that spill was going to take place and that came out, made clear that this was a company that had a bad reputation as a company interested in defending the environment. And it also was a company that had a large interest in funding research around alternative energy sources that proved the importance and necessity of holding on to fossil fuels, because that's where their money is invested. And if you think about it, if you're a student on a campus and you're very disgusted by what's happened with BP, it's hard to figure out how to attack that company in a way that is adequate to really causing it some problems. But if you're a student on this campus and you have a BP headquarters here that you have access to, because it's not their private world facility that is well guarded by private security, you can organize a large number of people to come in and picket, protest, occupy that facility. And you can make clear to the world what BP has done. You can drive it off of a campus like this, and if you succeed at that, you will have done more to defend public education than any other single measure that anyone could possibly take, because the lack of funding of public education is directly tied to the desire to supplement the funding that's received by private funding, to give the corporations the opportunity to decide who to give their money to, what to fund with their money, and rather than be taxed and put the money that they should be giving in a public coffers and making an independent evaluation of where it should go. There's a little bit of an aside, but there's an article in that was in the New York Times Magazine from a few months ago about the firing of the Chancellor of the University of Virginia, who was fired by their equivalent to the Board of Regents without any kind of discussion on the campus of why. And the faculty and the students rose up and objected to that firing, not because she was very popular, but because the idea that this board of overseers could take that kind of decision unilaterally with no consultation with anyone convinced that campus community that it was important to act. And in the discussion of what she had done, what was made clear was that there were like 50 really big donors that she was supposed to be courting, because they were people that could give multi-million-dollar contributions to the university. And the one that she had succeeded in getting a large contribution for was somebody who really loved his yoga instructor. And so his yoga instructor suggested that he give millions of dollars to create a yoga center at UVA. And this chancellor had to come up with a way to justify using money to build a yoga center at this time when student scholarships are declining, when there's all kinds of other things, including salaries for professors, that kind of donation could be used for, because those donations are tied to a specific purpose. So, okay, so I think that's what prompted the action, and on Bourgeonnot's part. And then that when he says that the people are looking for a confrontation and that's exactly what they're going to get, he's talking about his impulses, not the impulses of the crowd. When that crowd turns out in large numbers, the people who come out believe that the sheer numbers of them to protect those tents will effectively protect the tents. And they've seen what happened at the earlier demonstration. They've seen Yvette get beaten and bludgeoned with a billy club. And they know that action of the police could have nothing to do with getting to those tents, because if you want to clear a crowd and get through a crowd, well, the police know how to make a corridor and go in and do what they have to do and withdraw. And, you know, bludgeoning people into backing up but maintaining their lines doesn't achieve gaining entry to take down a tent. So from the student standpoint, I think they were coming out. If there were enough of them, they could protect the tents, defend the action, and they were not coming out looking for the kind of confrontation that occurred. Okay, the university's response to what occurred, I think, is pretty well known and documented in that Burgeonow denied knowing what was happening. And I think people have seen the various letters and then said, oh yes, it did happen, and apologized for it. And if you look through all the different emails, you'll see that some people really appreciated his savvy in terms of dropping the charges, saying that there would be no charges against people. And there's a big debate in a lot of these reports about about charges versus police brutality as a way to stop a movement. And if you look at this draft response piece that you have, you'll see a couple of you'll see this debate expressed in part in the Edley recommendations, which recommendation 35 says develop or modify existing student discipline processes as an alternative to arrests and the criminal justice system. And there definitely is a line of thought that says that's a better way to control people. He has as recommendation number 11, when faced with protesters who are non-aggressively linking arms, and when the event response team has determined that a physical response is required, principals should specify that administrators should authorize the police to use hands-on pain compliance techniques rather than the higher level of force, e.g. pepper spray or batons, unless the situation renders pain compliance unsafe or unreasonable. So it's definitely not spare the people of pain, it's just apply it in a different manner that's less obvious. And a lot of this report has how to get out of, you know, the legal problems that the universities are facing as Davis and UC Berkeley as a result of what they did. And so using techniques that can't be documented, like pain control versus batons, and they're not videos of, is one of the recommendations. There's another recommendation in here that the university has to be taking its own videos of what happens, so that it's not just reliant on student videos, and it can, you know, present its case through video evidence that's favorable to its side. There are several other things like that. In the very beginning of this report, it has amongst its most important recommendations that has its own Roman numeral number 5, which is on page 14 of the documents, that UC police departments are essential on our campuses. And I think you could say that Edley has some foresight, because it clearly was a demand that was growing in popularity in Berkeley Occupy to throw the police off of campus. It's a completely right demand for any of the movements, for the student movements to be making. It's clear from all the different reports that these police departments are brutal, are consciously brutal, enjoy the brutality that they get to utilize and impale students with, and that if you want the brutality to stop, you probably have to get rid of those. You do have to get rid of those police. So anyway, okay, let me go back to where I was, and I'll try to speed it up. I think, as I was saying, that the Burgeonow response was pretty well documented, but I want to just say a little bit about the UDOF response and then close, because that takes us into our current, where the importance of our lawsuit and what we're doing. The events at UC Davis followed the events at UC Berkeley by about a week, a little bit more than a week. And for people who have not seen those videos, but I'm going to assume that most people have, at UC Davis, the police hose down the students with pepper spray, and they do it after they've already succeeded in getting a path to the tents that they're trying to get at. It is purely to punish and to convince those students that they should disperse and never return and never think about protesting again. And in lieu of what happened, there are lawsuits that are filed. The lawsuit that people here filed with the assistance and of BAMN, and that Yvette is the lead plaintiff of, and a lawsuit for 21 students at UC Davis that was filed by the ACLU. And I think you can say that UDOF has two very different responses to those two lawsuits. And the different responses flow from his belief that the lawsuit that's filed at UC Berkeley is likely to go forward, could go to trial, needs to be you need to start setting up a serious defense, and that it could cause a big problem of exposure and financial liability for the university. In contrast, I think he thinks that the UC Davis lawsuit is much safer, that as a matter of course, the ACLU and the Lawyers Guild often file lawsuits after student protests when students have been arrested or they've been, manhandled by the police, and that their ordinary policy is to settle those lawsuits and to settle them before there are any depositions, any trial, any real exposure of what took place, and to claim that as a victory and to continue to fund their organizations by the money they attain from those settlements. And I'm not trying to be particularly critical of these organizations, but that has been their routine for a long time. And I think it is the expectation of police departments and of university administrations that that's what will occur. And in response to the Davis lawsuit, UDOF proposes that there be an independent task force that's created, and they write this long report about what took place at UC Davis that's quite damning to the administration and to the officers that were involved. And as a result of the filing of of this report coming out, the regents offer the students at Davis $1 million lawsuit, $1 million settlement to their lawsuit, a third of which goes to the lawyers, and the rest goes in small increments to the people who filed the lawsuit, and some amount goes to the general, like education on free speech. And what's odd about making an offer for settlement, it's not odd to make an offer for settlement early on. But oftentimes, if you're making a settlement, the first thing that you demand as the defendant, as the university being sued, or the police department that is being sued, is that the amount of the settlement be kept confidential. It's part of why you settle, because you don't want to encourage other people to file such lawsuits, and you want the right to have that be a confidential settlement. That's a little bit harder for a public university to do, but that clearly was never the intent with that settlement, which in my opinion was really cheap for what happened to the students there. So that lawsuit is settled early on. There's some, press around the report that's filed. Everybody apologizes for what happened, including the chancellor, and the matter is wrapped up last year. In response to our lawsuit, UDOF commissions this report, which you guys have, which is an unbelievable biased and hatchet job of, which is instead of setting up a large independent committee, UDOF asks a single UCLA police officer who's, like assistant chief, to assess what happened at UC Berkeley and determine whether the use of force that occurred was legal. And he finds that, yes, it was completely legal and that it was fine to use the batons in the way that they were. And what he says he would have done differently if he had been in charge was to tear gas the people rather than use the batons. And that the problem for the police was that the UC Berkeley administration banned them from using tear gas. This report comes out and there's very little fanfare about it because it's so outrageous that anyone who reads it is like, you have got to be kidding. This is supposed to be an objective, report on what took place on that day. In fact, this report's really hard to even find on the internet. And it doesn't have a nice cover and any of that. I mean, it's kind of buried deep, but it is for the purpose of letting us know we're going to have somebody who can testify that the force that was used was reasonable. And we're already trying to make our case for that. I would say not very successfully. There's one of the emails where one of the cops says, where there's an email from a police officer to Burgeonow saying the force that was used was clearly extreme, and I hope that they sue the hell out of you and that they get millions of dollars and all of that for what you did. And so there's clearly at least a difference of opinion. After this report comes out, then this report is the next report that's commissioned, the report that is done for UDOF by Edley and the general counsel, Charles Robinson. And this report includes in it, which you don't have, but you can look at this if you so choose, 2 sections, including a couple of appendices on using tear gas, on using mace or chemical weapons, and whether those are viable. So it's clearly in response to the first thing, and it's kind of, would that have been a better idea? And this report, I just want to reiterate, I mean, to me, this is one of those things that is classic from an administration in that it is the opposite of what it claims to be. It's not a guide for how to avoid violence when you're confronted with a student body that is actually prepared to take determined action to win. It's a guide for how you can use violence and get away with it. And it is that, and I think if you read it and you think about it, it makes clear kind of in the flip side what it is that the movement needs to do and how it is that the movement needs to be organizing itself to win. And I would just say, okay, I'm gonna wrap up and let people ask questions, including any questions that people have on the lawsuit. But I would say the following. First, what all of the reports make clear is that what the administration considers absolutely vital to know and to have at their disposal is 1, to know who the leaders of any movement are, and 2, to be able to have those leaders put in the position where they can be the agents of the administration. And in the Brazil report, one of the things that group of people really lauds in what happened was that they get student leaders out and they help to suppress the anger of the crowd. That they have professors and students who are trusted by the students and they can be utilized in that way. And what what is complained about in the report on what took place this time around by the commission that Tribunal appointed was that they couldn't figure out who the student leaders were. And they the administration set up a meeting with the student leaders that they wanted to meet with prior to the event. And two things happened. The ones that were serious about fighting to win didn't show up and canceled the meeting. And the ones who were prepared to help the administration, including one of the ASUC tops and executive officers and executive officer from the Graduate Student Association, they're meeting with the administration throughout the whole process. And their proposals are they're really bad. I mean, they're not just bad from the standpoint that, you know, that a student that cares about and is the elected representative of the student body should not be trying to knife the people in the back that elected him or her. But they're bad from the standpoint of being able to settle anything. And they come up with the administration with the proposal that one administrator goes down and announces to the crowd before the 9:30 demonstration that how about this? How about you guys can be on Sproul and you can set up a symbolic tent but not a real tent, and you can have tons of free speech but you can't fall asleep, and you can't bring any real tents or real sleeping bags or real other accoutrements. So if you want to sit there and freeze to death and debate, that's okay. But you can't, you can't put up one of those tents, because if you put up one of those tents, not only will you offend the corporate donors, but that 1% that the Occupy movement is against, that's the exact 1% of high-level donors, alumni donors, that we want to be cultivating to give money to this campus. And if it seems to them that this campus sanctions criticism of them for being the 1%, then we won't get that money. So commune to your heart's delight, but don't put up a tent. And needless to say, the movement rejects this proposal. Now, okay, let's just say the movement had accepted it. How does it get enforced? Do you have police there all night deciding whether a down comforter is the same as a sleeping bag? And what do? Arrest the person who brings that? Or, kick people who fall asleep because you're not allowed to fall asleep as part of this deal? It's a completely unenforceable plan, besides being a plan that is an attempt to defeat what the Occupy movement is fighting for. Okay, the other things that I would say in terms of, and I'll leave this to people to look at on their own, is this series of emails that are between Edley and some of the students. And in this email, which, Edley, there's a bunch of his emails in which he says, well, one really smart idea when stuff like this comes up is hold a town hall meeting and let the people blow off steam and then do nothing, and they all go home. And, that's a way to disperse and demoralize people, and that's what he does at the law school. It is worth noting that BAM's decision to shut down Tribunal's attempt to do the same thing was completely right, absolutely right, because that's the point of these things. They aren't to settle anything. They aren't to achieve anything other than the diffusion of anger. And in this, you'll see the response of Dean Edley to the two women students' concerns about how they were treated. The two Latina students, and
what page you got that on?
The one about
that is on
4408.
yeah, 4408. 8 is,
Yeah, it's the second page of that packet.
and it's a,
Okay, yeah, it starts at the bottom. His response starts at the bottom.
All right, am I looking at the right?
yeah.
This is the students after he gives this one, because it's backwards order.
Okay.
Return from Shanghai is where it starts, and then the students come after that.
Okay, so people can see the letter that is really mild in its tone. And
Their response to
at least response to them, right? And at least response to them is the second thing, right? So it's I'm sorry, because this is kind of,
So
it's in
first-
backwards order.
First page is the students asking him to deal with it. Second page
No,
is
no,
the
no, I'm
father.
sorry.
No.
Okay,
Oh.
okay, Yvette, take us through this.
First page, the first one.
We don't have the first letter
Okay,
is the problem,
Okay.
but it's a letter.
and do you
If you
have,
want at any point, I can show things.
okay, do you want
Why
to,
don't we put it up on the screen now?
Okay.
so you know what
Close.
okay, so we're going to,
You might want to give the
Because-
I was
background.
curious if there's anything regarding, like, they held a citizens review board for police or something at Boa Hall, and I forget what month that was, but it wasn't November 13th.
Right.
2011.
Right.
I was at that, and there was a lot of people just coming forward and saying
Right.
how they were treated on November 9th. And that was, a lot of people in tears, and some people was yelling at them, like myself.
and,
But, it was just a completely useless forum, a complete kangaroo court.
and he says that if you look at the very back of this on 3889, he said, Bob, I had a grueling town hall meeting today, much of which was focused on demands that I denounce you, consider yourself denounced. Two things. First, I think you were wrong about linking arms. They were interference with the police and that they can constitute grounds for arrest, but they are nonviolent like sit-ins, and he just goes through what he says, and it's it's clear that he has managed to figure out how to diffuse the situation. I think it's probably at least one of those meetings that you were at. Okay, so Ronald, do you have their letter?
Yes. But it's a few paragraphs. I don't know if you want to.
Do you want to just say the?
Just read it out loud.
Dear Dean Edley, on behalf of the Berkeley Law School community, BHSA feels it is necessary to reach out to you and the administration to request a formal response to the events that occurred at our law school on November 9th. We are not only shocked and appalled by the excessive force experienced and witnessed at the hands of the UCPD and Alameda County Sheriff, but we are also extremely disappointed in the administration's lack of support in formally denouncing the actions of the police officers who harassed our students. We ask that the administration issue a formal response condemning the police officers' unreasonable use of force in order to demonstrate to students that the administration is committed to ensuring that Bolt is a safe space for students and that any use of unwarranted force will not be tolerated. As you may already be aware, at least 2 Bolt students were victimized by the UCPD this past Wednesday, November 9th. An earlier letter from the La Raza Students Association and the La Raza Law Journal expound on the disturbing details of the occurrences, so we will refrain from belaboring the point out of respect for the students' right to privacy, a right which has already been so brutally violated by the UCPD. As evidenced by the events on Wednesday, the presence of UCPD near Bolt has now become a threat to student safety. The protests on Wednesday were based in Sproul Plaza, far from the Bolt campus, yet the UCPD had 2 patrol vehicles and numerous officers waiting at the steps of Bolt for no apparent reason. The detainment of and use of force against these Bolt students was unnecessary and has disturbed many members of the Bolt community. In fact, a member of BHSA witnessed one of the instances in its entirety and is still trying to come to terms with this traumatic incident. Countless other Bolt students and student organizations stand in solidarity with the students victimized by the UCPD on Wednesday. The actions of the UCPD have roused feelings of fear and frustration amongst the student body. As representatives of the students at Berkeley Law, BHSA supports UC Berkeley students and affiliates exercising their right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom to peacefully demonstrate. We are committed to ensuring that Berkeley Law is a safe place for all students, and respectfully request that the Dean's Office issue a public statement condemning the actions that occurred on November 9th, schedule a town hall meeting to discuss the matter in further detail, and provide full administrative protection to students if necessary. If you have any questions concerning this request, please feel free to contact BHSA. We appreciate your prompt response on this matter. Respectfully, the Bolt Hall Student Association.
And then his response is on the bottom of 408 and 409 and 410, which is that he just returned from Shanghai and he wanted to respond. It'll probably be something for the Bolt community, not BHSA. Here's why. And then on page 4409, I want you to know that I'm personally irked by the allegation that the, in quotes, administration of our school, which I take to mean me, is unsupportive or unconcerned. I was in Seattle on Monday and Tuesday and then traveled to the other side of the planet for 2 days of alumni events with the Chancellor and the Dean of Engineering, and for negotiations with 2 of China's leading law schools concerning student and faculty exchange, etc. I had fragmentary information about the events at Cal and thought it prudent to get all the facts before firing off a memo attacking or praising anyone. Now, okay, everyone's seen the YouTube stuff, including him. Like, this is clearly dishonest. Would you have had me do otherwise? If so, why? The facts as reported to me are quite troubling, but the appropriate response, I think, is measured, not hysterical. No Bolt student is in the hospital with a fractured skull, as happened in Oakland. No one has been murdered, as in Oakland. No Bolt students were arrested thanks to the action of Bolt staff. Where is your sense of proportion? My understanding is that many others, not from the law school, were subjected to far more serious police action. But then again, perhaps I don't still have all the information. There is time enough for redress, so why the harsh criticism from you? What would possibly give any Bolt student any reason to think that someone on the Bolt faculty or staff would support or condone, in quotes, excessive force or harassment of our students by police? Your letter seems to me way over the top. He does not answer the question that he poses by saying, not me. He answers the question that he poses by saying, I'm going to end by attacking you. And then he adds a little PS just to let them know that if you're the right kind of student, here's what you should have done. While in Shanghai, I heard directly from a few students to whom I replied directly with supportive messages. He knows that's not this. If you sent one to me, I apologize for missing it. The time zones plus my schedule made things a bit dicey. So, so he's, the dishonesty of the letter, he's getting these emails, he's reading them, he's responding to the ones that he likes in a supportive way, but theirs he doesn't have the information on. Right. And then on page 4408, the letter then is the answer by these students, and I just, turn people's attention to the last paragraph. We apologize if the letter was over the top or if our suggested response was hysterical and not measured. We respect your position as Dean of our law school and do not intend to question or criticize your judgment on how to handle the situation, but as elected student representatives, we felt it necessary to convey the overall concerns and demands of our students. If we are wrong in expressing the concerns of students through our position as student representatives, we apologize and welcome further conversations about what role we play conversations with him over what role we play as the elected Bold Hall Student Association representatives. Again, thank you for your email, and we hope we can work with you to ease the concerns and fears of our students. I mean, that's heartbreaking to me because it's so wrong-minded, but it absolutely exemplifies what I was saying, okay? The brutality of the police was nothing in terms of being able to affect these people's opinion. It did not weigh in half as much as him saying that they were hysterical and over the top and, you know, and basically screw you. And
Not in Oakland.
right, like, oh, so you weren't murdered? You know, you can be beat down like a dog, but if you weren't murdered, well, then you have nothing to complain about. I mean, it's a real demagogic statement. So, okay, why our case, why it's important? Because I think our case, we will have a hearing at some date to be set, that Ronald is negotiating tirelessly and taking a huge amount of crap, and the people who keep accusing us of trying to delay are now trying to delay and are being sugar sweet to Ronald after being plenty nasty. But in any case, that hearing will occur at some point. You can read the legal papers, which I think our response to their claim that they never violated the First Amendment, there wasn't excessive force used, that they could not possibly be sued for anything, is a really good and effective response. But I think the real thing about our lawsuit that's going to be so different from what took place at Davis is that it's an opportunity to get at the truth through the depositions of these various participants in the day's actions, which are going to be able to expose much, much more than these emails can, what the thinking, the mentality, the planning, the decision-making was that took place and that led to the beat down of the students by the police that took place. And I think that is going to be invaluable, because I think at the end of the day, I think we should, vote in this body that we fight to win in our lawsuit, that we fight to get the largest monetary, award that we can, that we do what's necessary to advance the cause of the movement. But I think nothing can advance the cause of the movement more than laying bare who these administrators are, that so many students aspire to be like and are prepared to give up everything to be like. And the other thing that I think is so important about this lawsuit is that, unlike 2009, there is a group of people on this campus, and you guys are distinguished not just on this campus, but on campuses all across the country, as a group of people who are saying, in the end, we identify with the oppressed. And to the question that was posed to the movement, are you for or against the oppressed? Are you for or against Oakland's right to be on this campus? Are you for or against the building of a movement that combines the strength of Oakland with the strength of Berkeley? The group of people who have filed this lawsuit have answered that question. Yes, we stand with the oppressed. Yes, we stand with Oakland. Yes, we stand with the struggle of the Black and Latino communities. we stand with the right of those students to be on this campus, and I think people know here that we are in the process of having to wage a big fight to even maintain the tiny numbers of Latino and Black students on this campus who clearly are regarded as a threat because of the potential leadership that even a tiny handful of them could provide for the oppressed. And you know, and to have a group of students that is prepared to say we put principle before paycheck is a hugely important development for the student movement. And you know, I think these, as I said, these reports make clear you need those independent leaders. Don't believe a word that is coming out of these administrators' mouths about being defenders of public education, because they're not. And you know, and continue to fight for, you know, the progressive aims of the movement, including that understanding and that embryonic development of a real link between this campus and Oakland. So I'll end there. Thank you.
The question is, out of everything that, you know, within all this documents and everything, do you have any smoking guns to like pin on people like Eddie and Robinson?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and the answer is not exactly. Yeah. You know, and yeah, that's right. But part of the reason for doing this lawsuit is to get those smoking guns. Yeah. And you know, many years ago now, we had to do. I had to do a deposition of Ward Connerly, and who is the, you know, was the Black opponent of affirmative action. He's the Black front man for, you know, for the white racist. And that deposition took hours and hours and hours, and it really was figuring out how to lay a foundation to expose the lies of what he was saying. And as a whole, I think that deposition works very well to do that. By the end of it, you're like, you know, like, this guy, we see who this guy really is. And
It's a video.
It's a video, yeah. And people can, if they want to suffer through lots of hours, they can see the long version, they can see the shorter version if they don't. But that's what we're going to have to do. And, you know, I mean, you know, I think we'll have to make a decision as a group once we get through this first stage. The hearing that we have will decide whether or not we're allowed to move forward with a lawsuit. I think we'll win that. I don't think that our case will be dismissed. And then I think the university makes an offer for settlement. And then I think, you know, that puts us in the position of deciding, do we go forward and, you know, go through the process of getting the depositions and all of that, which it'll take time, and it will take a lot of money, and the university will require that every one of our plaintiffs be available to be deposed, and they will try to investigate and go into as much in people's backgrounds as possible. I mean, it can be kind of ugly. But I think if we decide to go forward, then these people are arrogant and they're overconfident, and we'll have to work it out and plan it out, and we'll need people's thoughts, you know, our own plaintiffs' thoughts on how to do that. But I really do think we'll succeed. Yeah.
And one of the reports that you guys gave us, the emails, there's a letter, something, from Christopher Devlin to the Berkeley Law students, staff, and faculty.
Yeah.
Like page 44, 12. And in like the bottom paragraph, he talks about these things, so maybe the regulations that need to happen with the how the students got arrested by the police. And he says that the first student has his ID, but he's like his signs were like confiscated. But then the police on the other page says that like some code by CCR limits the signs the size of any sign by non-affiliated visitors. So if he was a student, why was his signs taken from him? And the second student, which was a girl, she was not carrying her ID, but then the whole some faculty came out and called it for charges to the student, but she was cited with a misdemeanor charge.
Yeah.
Because she was not having her ID. Is that like possible? Like you go like out to campus?
That you have to bring your ID and you have to turn your signs over?
Yeah, is that something that?
No, no, and you know we haven't done this as yet, but I really want to find these two people, and my guess is that they are not in law school anymore, because I think when you try to fight and then you're forced to back down, the way that these students were, it can put you in a state of despair and depression that makes it extremely difficult to maintain yourself as a student. And I think their two cases are, in some ways, the cleanest, clearest, purest violation of First Amendment rights that occurred on that day. Because you're allowed to walk around the campus without ID. You know, you're allowed to have a sign. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. And the material that you have doesn't have to be, approved of by the administration. I mean, go out on Sproul on any day at lunchtime, and and you'll see all kinds of stuff, right?
Then he says he quotes from codes in the Berkeley campus that says that you carry your ID, like a faculty student or anyone.
Yeah, you can't selectively enforce rules that you have. You know, like people aren't checked all the time for their ID. They do not do ID checks here. You know, they might start that at some point, and but they don't do it. No one knows that this is a regulation even, and it's a regulation that probably can be challenged. You know, now that it's been utilized, it can be challenged on its face as being unconstitutional, because whatever it's trying to address, it's too broad, and it doesn't, whatever reason the university is using for these things have nothing to do with what they're trying to avert. And they claim, I mean, okay, Ronald's going to say something on this, but I just would say, if you read this huge fat report, which is the one from UC Davis, they claim that the reason why they hosed down their students with pepper spray was to stop young women from being sexually assaulted by non-affiliates that would come on the campus. And I mean, their crap is just so over the top. And okay, we've had cases here as BAM of women that have come to us who've been sexually assaulted by people not from Berkeley, and all that was done for them was that they were driven off the campus by the administration to cover for their male assailants. They were given lots of bad counseling, lots of bad advice, and encouraged to write statements in which they defended in which their main focus was saying maybe the guy didn't know, even though they knew he did know that they didn't want to have sex with him. So, that's their real concern. But this is, they just say any old thing in these things. So, okay, Ronald?
Oh, Anthony Moriali, one of the plaintiffs, wants to say something.
Okay.
Anthony.
Can you hear me?
Yep, but scream loud so everyone can.
Okay. All right, I'm getting some feedback. So from the tone of your presentation, it seemed to me at least that you're intent on taking this trial and not accepting or not thinking that it would be offered any type of settlement. And I definitely agree with that sentiment. But I was wondering if there's any discussion that's gone since I haven't been around, or I mean, has there been a stance taken by the team on how to, you know, how we're going to react to any possible settlement offers? Is there, you know, I think some type of agreement or solidarity would be important.
Yeah. No. Yeah, he's saying that he definitely agrees with what he assumes to be the case from the tone of my presentation, that we would recommend against taking a settlement. You know, that's our job as lawyers, is to make a recommendation to the people that we represent, and then give the people that we represent the opportunity to agree or disagree with that recommendation. And then he was asking, okay, has there been any discussion with the people thus far of that possibility? And the answer to that is no. I think in part because I'm sure that even if we had a discussion, we would have to discuss it again when there was a settlement offer tendered, because that's kind of when people really decide. It's almost always, it's based on the amount of money and the other conditions that are applied to the settlement of the case. And one thing is for sure, okay, like I said, it's our job to recommend, but I'm going to say this definitely to make a strenuous recommendation that all these other suits settle for, the university agreeing to carry out these, these recommendations that are made of, develop better campus police relations, and, have a more experienced team available for stuff. One of the things in the Edley Robinson thing is do play acting. So, using the administrators like a student, so that, you get it all down, what the different levels of force are, and then he has a chart, use this force for this, and all this crap. And why would we agree to something like that as a resolution of the problem when it's clearly the opposite of a resolution of the problem? It's just a cover-up. But anyway, we will come to that when we get to it. And our first thing is just, making sure that this judge does not throw out our case. Yeah. Tanya?
Yeah, I just was looking at the letter that Andreas had pointed out, and I just wanted to say a word on Edley and just the importance of us continuing to build our fight against privatization and exposing just his real arrogance and contempt for students. I mean, if this guy's going to be potentially the chancellor, I mean, I just want people to look at, in that same page, he uses a letter to the campus about this completely over-the-top racist harassment, Arizona treatment of both law school students. Mm-hmm. He uses this not as an opportunity to come out against that or assert any rights for both law students, but to scare all law students. In that same paragraph, he tells them they should be lucky that this woman wasn't officially arrested. He says in the bottom there, police then removed the handcuffs and cited the student for a misdemeanor without formally arresting her. This latter point is important for purposes of admission to a bar practice. Getting arrested under any circumstances is not something a law student can afford to take lightly. Please remember that it will create headaches later, including demands for elaborate explanations. So here, this young woman is harassed for being a Latina, and he's trying to scare law school students out of taking any kind of protest action, and he's lecturing the law school students, well, you better be happy she didn't get arrested, and you should never get arrested, and he's just putting the students down when they're raising civil rights and civil liberties and First Amendment and student rights and just basic concerns about the mistreatment of their peer. And I just find it just completely arrogant, and this is the opposite. They want some kind of response to the injustice, and he's using this to make them feel weak, to put them down, to tell them to shut up and don't talk about racism that you experience, and you better be happy you're here, not Oakland. Right. With those people, meaning the Black and Latino community. And I'm just, as someone that's really proud to be you know, an alumni of Berkeley that works in Oakland and is for uniting the two and is for a strong movement. I just really want us to expose his arrogance. And the last thing I would point people to is in our last BAMN meeting, we read an article by Edley from 2005, which was publicized, I think it's the LA Times, I'm not sure, about his vision for privatization for the university. And it's just really clear that he is for, in that letter, he just basically disrespects everybody except for the Bolt Law School, says we should be getting private money and not worrying about giving it to Riverside or those other UCs. He again references, you know, anybody that's not at Bolt Law School, like he puts down undergrads as not as important, and he's just got this elitist vision that only a few, you know, have to have a certain appropriately conservative, servile attitude to wield any power at these universities. And it's the opposite of what a mission is for a public university. And he says in that same letter, oh, but we won't privatize our mission. Well, I'm sorry, if the terms of your law school funding are never to take, you know, a corporation that is doing all these crimes to court, yes, that is privatizing your mission. Mm-hmm. You know, if the terms of the science grant are never to come out against BP, that is privatizing your mission. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to really say I really liked where you started in terms of just the double speak, the opposite, when they're saying they're for not privatizing our mission, but everything he says is against the general public. Their biggest concern is quote unquote non-affiliates, you know, rather than welcoming the community and providing services to the community as a public university. So anyway, yeah, but I really think people should read that 2005 article. It's a real expose on his support for privatization.
And I just say, I think being handcuffed is being arrested. I mean, you know, I think that is a real misstatement of the law, and that he's, you know, but he's engaged in a, like what you were saying, Tanya, a constant process of trying to repress anything that, you know, like the average law student is always looking for legal stuff to do. And so I think he wants to negate any thought that the, you know, a law school defender society would take up this case and would say, because he's going to state what the law is. And the law is it's possible, you know, it's fine to detain you, he says, to handcuff you, and then to say that's not an arrest. Really? Really?
Right.
He, you know, like I said, I think he's going to be the next chancellor, and I think from the standpoint of what the university intends, including the continued reduction of underrepresented minority students on this campus, they feel that having somebody who is black and the chancellor carrying out that policy is far more likely to get away with it than, you know, than somebody who isn't. And they're cynical, he's cynical, the whole thing is just it's just so wrought with cynicism. And Tanya, what you said is just really brings up a point. And all of these and all this crap that's been written, there is not a single person who says, I agree with the students, public education needs to be defended. Right. Not one of them. Right. Not one of them comments on the substantive issues of the protests and stands with the students. It says a lot about who these people are and what they think. So, yeah.
Speaking of selective enforcement, I don't know if you are aware, I'm sure some people here are, that Occupy Cal did in fact continue beyond November 15th, even though a lot of people within the current student movement tend to want to purposely forget that it did. But there were some dedicated radicals still doing things, and one of the things we did was set up tents again on February 9th, and myself included, and spend nights in the tents on Sproul. And I'm wondering if this helps your case of selective enforcement.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, certainly be willing to help in that
regard
as much as possible, because
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and it's one of the points that we make in our answer to them, that this had taken place before. Like, they didn't have the policy of, you know, of physically attacking students to move tents when tents have been set up before, or people have, you know, done actions that, you know, that progress for several days on the campus.
Yeah, we were up for over a week, so, and then we were having another, you know, wonderful pre-dawn raid. And several people in the, you know, speaking of what is it called, the Bolt law, or whatever they are quoted, Occupy Oakland again came up in support of the Occupy Cal encampment that was raided, and they marched up late in the evening to support us as like kind of a rally to support our tents that had just been raided the day before. And an hour before they even began their march, there was a resident up in the Berkeley Hills named Peter Sapor, who was just randomly just killed by a, you know, home invader trespasser, but this guy who had mental problems. But the Berkeley police and the UCPD both blamed Occupy Oakland and Occupy Cal on their lack of response because they had a monitored it. And then people in the Bolts.
We were too busy paying for helicopters to watch you.
Yeah.
Well, and it clearly didn't hold any water because the murder happened an hour before they had even left the street in Oakland. But you had professors and other administrators in the Bolt that were quoted in the Daily Cal that Occupy Oakland is responsible for this man's murder. And, you know, I kind of take that personally because I helped organize that rally. And, you know, these people...
the specter and the fear of racism is for them to assume that it must be a black man entering someone's home and killing them. And do we really want black people near Berkeley? So, I mean, that's really what it is, too.
It's certainly part of it, and still kind of miffed at the law professors and staff around here.
Yeah, yeah. That's a... it's good to be really distrustful of all lawyers, including your own. So, you know, if you disagree with me, definitely say something, because it's go ahead.
To that point, on a separate issue, I mean, is you care to speculate anything collusion of ACLU and the administrations to get such a piddling settlement? I mean, is there some sort of old boys club going on there?
I mean, I think there's something, okay? I mean, you know, okay, we don't have proof of stuff, but that's excuse my language, but that is a cheap settlement, just from the standpoint of what you would be fighting for. And it, you know, there are things that, so I'm not going to say, you know, I'm not going to accuse them of that without knowing, but I will say this, that what happened to those students was so outrageous, and it deserved so much more of a response than what came. And to say that the promulgation of the Davis report, which is another one of those, it's not that you shouldn't do it, but you shouldn't do it the way you did it reports. Like, it's saying, okay, the police, you know, they clearly used bad judgment. What they should have done was waited till 3 a.m. and then cleared the tents, because less people would have been. It's that kind of report. It's a report in which the suggestions that are made and the sympathies for the pure crap that is coming out of the administration's mouth is they are very definite about what they're proposing, and it isn't stop beating or pepper spraying students for being able to express their opposition, and there's nothing in the settlement itself that speaks to the question of the defense of public education. And free speech is a right just kind of floating out there. It's not it's always attached to, it's always suppressed for some purpose. And you've got to get to the purpose to make the real defense of it. So I just say on what you were saying on the police, you know, on the using the pretext of the shooting to do stuff. That's Edley's main argument. I think you have this in your package about keeping the UC police departments are essential for our campuses. He says that that the massacre that took place at Virginia Tech in 2007 is what justifies having the police on these. And that's such a complete non sequitur that you're like, you know, like they have a lot of trouble defending their policies, including that one. Yeah.
I wanted to just hold a vote.
Okay.
And so the proposal that you were saying was that we vote on supporting the case. Hi guys, can you stay for the vote? Didn't you even stay for the vote real quick? You have like a minute? Would that be okay? For just like 3 minutes? Thanks a lot. So I think it was that we support BAMN's lawsuit to win justice for Occupy Cal protesters and support the plaintiffs' right to, I don't know what the terminology is, but to win as much justice as possible.
Oh, to win, the plain way of putting it is to win as much money as possible.
Okay.
Because in the end, that's what determines to everybody, you know, did you actually win?
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And you know, and then beyond that, I'd say, you know, just the, you know, voting to maintain the efforts that you're absolutely right are going to flourish again, even if they've, you know, even if they are at a lower level now, especially post the election, to, you know, to really fight for the principles of the defense of public education, the increase of underrepresented minority students on these campuses, the defense of intellectual freedom, and the linking up of the fight on these campuses with the oppressed communities, in particular the Latino and Black communities of Oakland and beyond. So I would just add those things.
So does anyone have any questions about that or any discussion on those? Okay, so all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay. And anyone who on the Skype, I don't know if anyone on Skype wants to be counted or not.
Either yes or no.
Yes or no?
Well, we should assume a yes unless someone says no or abstain.
Right.
Okay, so we'll assume yes, but I will call a no and abstention vote, okay? All right, any opposed to that? Any abstaining? Okay, and on Skype too, any opposed or abstaining?
I don't know if we all have mics too, so.
I see. All right,
Well, we're going to assume.
we'll assume
Support.
otherwise. Text us later. All right, it's unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone.